Good evening, everyone. I call this meeting of the Urban Design Commission to order. The time is now 6:04 p.m. on Tuesday, October 27th, 2020. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, as well as Mayor Curtitone's declaration of emergency dated March 15th, 2020. This meeting of the Urban Design Commission will be conducted via remote participation. The members of the Urban Design Commission present are myself, Sarah Lewis, I'm a co-chair. Luisa Oliveira is also a co-chair, is present this evening. Frank Valdez, Deborah Fennick, and Andrew Abba, our commissioners, are all present this evening. Also with us are Courtney Kirk from Public Space and Urban Forestry. Unfortunately, Dan Bartman, who is our usual liaison, is otherwise engaged with the Land Use Committee of the City Council tonight. We have a full agenda this evening. There are 4 projects going forward. So I am going to keep us on task as best we can. So I, apologize if I'm a little brusque, but I want to make sure we're not here half the night. So all of these projects are in mid-rise districts. So they all have a similar set of guidelines by which we need to review and discuss. And with that, I'll start. Our first on our agenda is 379 Somerville Avenue. That was continued from our previous meeting.
Thank you, Sarah. This is Will from Culture Design. I don't have the option to share, Sarah. Can you grant me that?
Yep, just give me a second here.
And Sarah, I'm also here, Dan Vigorito as the attorney, but I know we want to move things along, and this was heard at the last hearing or meeting of the UDC, so I'm going to have Will explain the changes so we can move on to the next project quickly.
Yeah. Can we have presenters? Can we see presenters?
Yeah, I don't have the ability to show video either for some reason.
Okay.
It's not being offered to me. Otherwise, I will.
All right. Yep, I'm working on changing the presenter now. Just hold on one second here.
I'm only seeing Frank and Sarah. Is that what everyone else is seeing as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, Deborah doesn't have her camera on.
Okay.
But she is here. Oh, there she is. You're muted.
Sorry, I didn't realize that I hadn't turned it on.
I will.
Good evening.
All right, there. You should have presenter privileges.
Yeah, you should be all set, Will.
Can everyone see that?
Not yet.
People can see my screen.
Yeah, we can.
Now you can?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so name again is Will Chalfant from Colsa Design. We're the architects on the project, and quickly go through the changes that we've made. A few things. First off, we were discussing sort of the program for the rear yard and how that would be used, and what sort of the intention of that rear yard landscaped area would be. So what we've done is we've opened this up. We previously had a trash enclosure back here. We've moved that down into the basement so that we have a sort of symmetrical space back there that we can then treat, which I will get to in the next page. That trash has been moved into the basement. And what we've decided is, because that space is landlocked in the rear, the best way to treat this is to have it so that it's something that both the residents up above and the tenants of the commercial space can enjoy. So the thought was to make it a very decorative and almost formal garden that had a variety of species that would flower throughout the season and provide some visual interest, but also be something that could be enjoyed from a sound standpoint and a smell standpoint, with the use of a water feature in the rear and some of the plantings that I mentioned earlier that will provide, sense to the abutters and the residents year round. Also on the front, obviously we don't know who is going to be the tenant in this space. I think in a perfect world, it would be some sort of restaurant establishment. And so what we're showing is a series of planters that would have a rotating plantings in them, depending on the season, and some cafe tables, so that we can activate this portion of Somerville Avenue and sort of have this beautifying space both from the front all the way through to the rear. So the landscape architect is not on with us tonight, but he might be able to speak in greater detail to some of the planting choices. But as I mentioned, it's more of a formal garden, but with some plantings of interest that can be geared throughout the year. Now on the roof, it's not a habitable green roof, so we're simply treating this with a 6 to 10 inch tray system, mostly a sedum or some wild grasses. And we're providing access to provide maintenance up on that roof, but other than that, it's staying as you saw it previously. So this is our previous version that you all saw, and I know that some of the comments were, using some higher quality materials or materials with a purpose on the front, as well as sort of simplifying the design. There was a lot going on between precast, soldier coursing, the panels, different colored panels, the brick, the stone at the ground level, as well as the sunshade on the top level. So what we've done is done just that, at least in my opinion. We've simplified this, and I know on one of the versions that we showed the UDC, there was a copper option, and I know Frank in particular, among others, were interested in seeing that maybe explored a little bit more. And I did reference the building, Frank, that DeMille Schaefer did at Tufts, and saw that there is some very nice copper panels, pre-patina panels being used there. And so I've found a company called Zahner, I'm not sure how it's pronounced exactly, that has these pre-weathered patina copper panels. And they're available in a variety of sizes and shapes, really, it's up to you. And I looked at doing this as sort of a running bond initially with the panels, and it really sort of fought the building, which is more of a clean line aesthetic overall. So I thought that just these thin panels of copper really worked well. And we carried that copper to all of the floors of the building in different ways. On the ground level, we're now treating, it's subtle, but we're treating the light fixtures with the same patina copper. We've made that ground level all brick. We've continued the sign band across, but we've broken it slightly, which will get into, well, I'll ask the UDC to maybe clarify for me if that's going to be allowed within the zoning, but the idea was to maintain that sign ban, but also differentiate the residential entry from the commercial portion. We previously had a wrought iron black railings. We've gone to a full glass railing, which per Deborah's comment, I think does help deal with the lightness. It helps lighten up the facade, being that it's a 5-story building and a very narrow lot. I think we've discussed that. It's about 41 feet wide. And then the top floor, you know, we've simplified that as well, frankly. We previously had 3 sets of windows up there with the sunshade. And, you know, we're sort of flanked by a stair tower on the left and a stair tower on the right that make those sides of the building unable to really treat with glazing. So we've put in an accordion style operable door up there to really open up this unit. As you'll see, it's, you know, not an incredibly large unit, so we thought we'd get as much light in there as possible and make this an indoor outdoor living space, because it is a large terrace on that top level. And we framed it in a patina copper sort of picture frame, which I think, you know, ties together well with what's going on down below. We've got the copper panels on the bays. We've also treated our flashing with a copper color. And we removed a lot of the stone, other than the small water table you have here, which is really minimal because of the amount of glazing on the ground level. So I'll just go through a few more views of this. And again, we've added our cafe seating along the front just to sort of give a little more of a visual cue as to what that'll look like. We previously had this sort of ornate precast occurring in multiple places, and we've simplified that to the top level. You know, previously we talked about the side abutting the existing building, and that it's only a 2-story building, so we will be treating that whole side with brick. Same as the other side, we've got some reveals in it. And then in the rear, we've sort of, I'll go to perspectives and may show it better, but we've got this brick wall, which is effectively acting as like an end wall. And so we have that protruding outbound slightly from the face of the bays in the rear, and sort of tucking in these little balconies along the side here. And what we've done is treated the majority of this area in panel, but then we have an inset of the copper panel on these balconies here. Another thing to notice is we've added this glazing down at the ground level, looking from that commercial space into the rear yard to enjoy the space that we previously looked at on the landscape plan. These perspectives are, you know, a little more diagrammatic because they're black and white. And then we've done sort of a realistic view of the building along Somerville Ave and how it fits contextually into its abutters. I know a lot is changing in this area, but we wanted to sort of show the, you know, some of the grass that may be growing up top there, as well as these very light balconies, and then again this patinaed copper and how that carries down throughout the building. So with that, I think I'll, in an attempt to keep things moving, I'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, does the commission have any questions for the applicant at this point? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Will. I am going to, as I warned, keep us moving right now. So we have the guidelines to go through and decide if they're met. So keep in mind, I think we already have the preferred schematic design. So we need to talk about priority design guidelines and to make sure if the design guidelines are satisfied. Is it easier for you folks if I read these off?
I guess one question I have is so we're going to go through guidelines and say if they're met or not. Is there an opportunity to sort of maybe not ask questions, but just sort of discuss a little bit in terms of,
Yes,
okay, is that now?
yes. Yeah, if you have any questions for Will or discussion amongst yourselves.
I guess, so on the landscape plan, I guess I can go ahead and ask, so you just as something that is an amenity to the residents and the tenants. The plan I think that we received, it's listed as not accessible. Is that the case?
So it's not accessible for the tenants. I'm not sure why. It's accessible to the commercial space because we put storefront in the rear that can be with a door so that they can get out there to tend to it. I think just from a logistical standpoint, we don't really have a way to get the residents down there, so that's why we said it.
And I guess my other question is, right now, it looks like that essentially when we're looking out there, we have a beach pebble as the material, the sort of surface paving material, and then we have just sort of an offset with the center of it is more Pachysandra. But the primary paving material seems to be beach pebble. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I think so. I mean, I can say I think that's going to create some accessibility issues for you. That wouldn't be an accessible surface at all. So I think that's something that would need to be addressed. I think in terms of the landscape plan as well, I think just something that pops out as me is you have a very, or you've resolved the building to be sort of a lot more restrained and a lot more contemporary. And it's a little jarring to see this landscape plan because it is probably the most traditional landscape, and to see that contemporary building with this sort of almost very traditional Italianate, landscape tradition. It just seems very jarring and very off. So I would maybe ask that this be sort of thought about a different way. I think sort of in addition to that, I'm not personally sort of a native plants purist, but it does jump out that there's not a single native plant on the list. And I think that's a little bit of a missed opportunity, I think, for a planting plan that's being developed for a building that's going in 2020. I think in terms of the building edits that you guys made, the building definitely, I think a lot of what our feedback was to sort of calm it down a little bit, and I think a lot of that has been heard, and I see that reflected. I can sort of pass over to Deborah and Frank if they have opinions.
Yeah, I agree with the building, and I think the only comment I have is the top level, which I don't think is going to be that present, from the street. I guess you get back, you'll see the whole facade and the whole composition, and you've got that big opening right in the middle. And I'm not sure it needs to be. It's a real AB building. So I think if it favors, the interior is located so that it's, in the perfect place for the interior, that might be fine. How that reads with the whole building. Maybe it's a little like the garden in the back, which is very formal and, symmetrical. It doesn't need to be. Not that I think it's a killer, but I think you could look at the interior and favor, what optimizes the experience of the interior.
Yeah, I agree. It sort of would almost make more sense to be off center slightly because of the bays in the front, but I didn't go to the floor plan, but the left-hand side, the stair is directly there, so I can't put windows there. And then on the right, it's kind of I know what you're saying, and I think maybe we'll just maneuver that a little bit. And then to your point, make it not less as formal. But I agree. You're not going to experience that top floor unless you're, maybe in the parking lot of, Market Basket. Thank you. But But yes, I think that's a good point.
Chairperson Lewis and the commission, this is Courtney Kirk. Luisa Oliveira had some technical challenges during the landscape presentation of this project. So I wanted to be able to open up some questions to the commission specifically about the curb cut and the basically there's the ability that someone can just drive in the curb cut and straight into the front door of the residential entry. I think that there are some safety issues that perhaps from the site perspective you guys could comment on, as well as the rear landscape being entirely enclosed. If the next door neighbor decides to fully build their property, there would be no ability to access or rescue anyone in the back courtyard of the commercial space.
Sure. So I'll start with the curb portion. She's probably reacting to the rendering, which still shows the existing curb cut. Good catch. That should have been photoshopped. We will need to shrink that curb so that that's not an apron that you can just drive up to. Regarding the sort of isolated nature of the rear yard, you know, we talked about putting a gate maybe into the easement on the left, but for your point, if that's ever developed, that would go away. I mean, we're not intending to create a unsafe environment back there. The building's fully sprinklered. You know, we'll obviously work with the fire department if there's something that they really don't like about this, but they have, to my understanding, looked at this and not commented. Yeah, it's not accessible to everyone, but I think, you know, we obviously talked about accessibility potential issues there. We'll get rid of those pebbles and go to a more rollable surface, walkable surface. But I guess that would be my response to that. And I do agree about the formality of the garden not matching the building. I had some differences with the landscape architect on this, but I tended to, I thought really, I do like the idea of water. I think it could be a much more contemporary looking fountain possibly, and then maybe some treatment of the hedges or the plants that aren't so, you know, Versailles looking in nature, but.
I would definitely encourage you to win that argument, because it's a very old school, and if in a different, I'm not opposed to traditional landscape architecture in any way. It seems very out of place for this building and that amount of space. It seems very odd for that context.
Okay, I think the point of what we're trying to do there, though, is, and just to get across here, is that it is something that can be visually interesting to the commercial space and from above. So whether or not we change the style of that I agree. I think we should. I just want to point out the program-wise what we're looking at that space to be, you know, while still maintaining our zoning compliance.
I hear you. I am not super, so in Somerville, we have limited open space. Making the open space that we have usable seems a higher priority to me. Sort of we can look at it from inside doesn't appeal to me that much. I think even if it's a tenant space, I think that the ability to go outside, even in some small amounts, and experience the space should be encouraged and hopefully designed in.
Okay. Right.
Great. Do we have any other questions, comments? Frank, are you
I
good?
agree with my colleagues and all the comments they said. I have nothing different to add.
Okay. So I apologize, I couldn't make the last meeting. Did you go through the guidelines then? I didn't ask that first.
I believe we did, but
Okay, so those have all been satisfied. Okay, well then, can we just make a couple of motions?
Can you hear me, Sarah?
Yes.
Sorry. It's Louisa. I have to call in because I've got problems. I don't think we went through the guidelines last time.
I thought Melissa did, but we can certainly do them again. Let's.
I can go through them one by one. Do the commissioners by chance have the guidelines in front of them from the zoning ordinance?
Yes,
I can read them if that's easier.
sure.
I could be wrong, but my recollection is that she was going to read them, and then the committee said we'd like you to come back with some of these modifications before we go through it. Andrew, do you remember that?
We did go through them.
I don't remember either way. I'm sorry.
Okay, so sounds like we should probably go through them again.
Okay. All right, so facades. Are the storefronts and lobby entrances framed by solid materials such as pilasters, columns, spandrel positioned between pilasters or columns that extend from the upper stories, flat wall to either side of a void or punched opening?
Yes,
Okay. If one person says yes, and anybody that then objects, please speak up otherwise, or I'll just keep going. I'll keep going through. Storefronts and lobby entrances must be set within the resulting frame provided for each by the facade.
Yes.
Yes.
Materials framing each storefront or lobby entrance may be integrated into the design of the facade or customized for individual storefronts.
yes,
Mechanical louvers necessary for venting purposes are not permitted in the required frame, but may be incorporated into any storefront or lobby entrance.
I would say though this, Will, if the elevations don't show it and we're saying yes, then you can't show it again, right? Okay, so I would say that per the elevations how they are presented, yes.
This is being recorded. You're right.
All right, facades must differentiate the ground story of the building from the upper stories through horizontal articulation, a change in material, or a change in window size or pattern.
Yes.
Yes,
For buildings with more than one facade, the design of the base must align horizontally at the corner.
yes,
Facades must provide surface relief from the average plane of the facade by at least 4 inches through the use of architectural elements such as windows, bays, columns.
yes,
The facade of any building greater than 100 feet in length must be vertically, let's not worry about that one. That's not applicable.
not applicable.
All right, architectural design guidelines. Facades should be visually divided into a series of architectural bays that are derived in general from the building's structural base spacing.
Yes,
Piers, pilasters, or other features defining each architectural bay should either extend all the way to the ground or terminate at any horizontal articulation defining the base.
yes,
Architectural bays should align in general with individual or groups of storefronts and lobby entrances.
Yes.
Piers, pilasters, or other features defining each architectural bay should always project forward and be uninterrupted by any horizontal articulation.
Yes.
Vents, exhausts, and other utility features on building facades should be architecturally integrated into the design of the building and located to minimize adverse effects.
Yes. As they are shown.
Right, okay. Buildings that terminated vistas should be articulated with design features that function as focal points. Is this
Yes.
building a terminated vista?
Yeah. I don't think it's applicable, really.
Yeah, okay.
Open to interpretation.
Fenestration glazing should be inset from the plane of exterior wall surfaces.
Yes.
Ribbon windows should be avoided. There are no ribbon windows. Monotonous and repetitive storefront or lobby systems, awnings, canopies, sign types, colors, or designs should be avoided.
Yes.
Yes.
Storefronts and lobby entrances should include awnings or canopies to provide weather protection for pedestrians and reduce glare for storefront display areas.
Yeah.
Lobby entrances for upper story uses should be optimally located, well-defined, and clearly visible, and separate from the entrance for the other ground story uses.
Yes.
Yes.
Lobbies should be limited both in width and total area to preserve floor space and frontage for other ground story uses.
Yes.
Yes.
The selection of materials, fenestration, and ornamentation should result in a consistent and harmonious composition that appears as a unified whole.
Yes.
The type and color of materials should be kept to a minimum, preferably 3 or fewer.
Yes.
2 or more wall materials should be combined, only one above the other except for bay windows.
Yes.
Wall materials. Sorry, I lost my place. Wall materials appearing heavier in weight should be used below wall materials appearing lighter in weight.
Yes.
Horizontal or vertical board siding or shingles, regardless of material, should be avoided.
Yes.
Architectural details and finished materials for the base of the building should be constructed of architectural concrete or precast cementitious panels, natural or cast stone.
Yes.
All right, and there, I believe there isn't any EFS on the building. So that's
Correct.
not applicable, correct? Okay.
Correct.
All right. So I'd like to make a motion that the design guidelines are satisfied.
Is it possible to ask for a revised landscape plan for, I mean, we don't need to do a full meeting about it, but just to see it in the future and sign off on it?
I believe so.
That would be my only request before we move forward.
Okay. Sorry, making notes. All right, so Will, if you can provide a revised landscape plan, we can share it with the commission and not bring it up at another meeting. So if there's comments or feedback.
No problem.
All right, so I would like to make a motion that the guidelines have been satisfied.
So moved.
Second.
Yes.
All right, so all in favor, great. Sorry, let me. All right, so all guidelines have been met. Is there a particular guideline that you would like to designate as a priority? If so, can we have a motion for priority guidelines?
Sarah, it's Louisa. Are there no landscape requirements for this project? And then secondly, I think we have to roll call vote to accept the project as it was presented.
All right, let's do, okay, roll call vote. So the, for the guidelines being met, satisfied. Andrew,
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
Deborah,
Yes.
all right, all in favor, thank you. And do we have a motion for any priority guidelines?
I don't think so.
Okay. And the design modification is a revised landscape plan. So can we have a motion that the applicant will submit a revised landscape plan in accordance with the comments from the commission for review via email rather than at the next meeting?
I motion that the applicant submit a revised landscape plan via email for review internally, as opposed to holding another meeting.
Second now.
Okay.
Can I just ask for clarification? Sorry. Can we still move on to the next step in this if we provide the plan? I just don't want.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
All right, roll call vote. Deborah,
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
okay, so that motion passes and we'll expect to see that via email.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, William.
Okay, so next on our agenda, we have 371 Highland Avenue.
Good evening,
And I'm
Sarah. Vigorito. Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Ann Vigorito, on behalf of the applicant. It's the Ann and Will show because Will is also the architect. So I'll be very brief. 371 Highland Ave is a former gas station, service station. It was operated there for many, many years, and it's in an MR4 zoning district. The proposal is for a 4-story mixed-use building with 22 residential units, commercial on the first level, and there will be 13 parking spaces provided on the site. If you have any questions for me, or if you would rather Will get into the presentation of the plans, do tell me, because I know you have a tight schedule and it's almost 7 p.m. now. So would you like Will to start in on the plans?
I believe that sounds good to me. Commission, any objections?
Nope, go for it.
Sorry,
Will, I think-
I got kicked off there for a moment.
That was my fault, Will. It's Sarah White. Sorry. I didn't know
That's
you were up
okay.
next.
That's all right.
All right, I think you still have presenter, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just restoring those. Here
Okay.
we go.
Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so it's me again. This is a current gas station. Well, it was a gas station. It's been shut down for a few years now. Located on Highland Ave, about maybe an eighth of a mile before Davis Square, maybe a quarter mile. And it's too bad that Dan isn't here, because he and I have had a lot of back and forth on this, and I would have loved to have his input here, but that's fine. But the program of the project is 22 dwelling units plus ground floor retail. And the ground floor, there's also some amenity space and a bike room, a trash as well. We are proposing rather a below grade garage, even though we are in the transit oriented zone and we're not required to do so. The owners, developers of the property felt that from a leasing standpoint to the commercial, as well as maybe a few tenants, that it would be a nice option to have. We do only have 13 spaces down there, but they felt it was important to get some in there, and I don't think it's a bad idea, frankly. Additionally, we have a common, I'll go through the floor plans, sorry, I don't mean to drone on. So from a site plans perspective, we're obviously filling up quite a large portion of the site. Strangely enough, this area of Highland Ave has no street trees on this side of the road. So part of our improvement to this would be to add 4 new street trees along Highland, as well as obviously redoing the entire sidewalk, because it's currently one big curb cut. We're sort of landlocked in the rear by buildings, so we are providing a rear exit out of the garage down here, but it's mostly going to be used as a secondary means of egress for the garbage, and mostly be comprised rather of pavers. So again, I'll just go quickly through the plans. So here's the garage level, mechanical spaces and such down here. We're ramping down the ground level. We have our garage entry here, residential entry in the middle, and our bike room here has a direct access right under the street, and then a rather generous commercial space just under 2,000 square feet. Providing a fitness room for now that could become a lounge. We're not sure what's going to happen there. So, this is sort of an interesting. This is my first go around with the 100-foot, I guess I'll call it, rule, as far as the building needing to read as 2 very distinct buildings. The original design on this was a consistent aesthetic all the way across. We had neighborhood meetings, which were interesting because for one of the first times in a while, I can recall a neighborhood saying, we'd really like to see something A, taller, but B, a little more contemporary. And they were okay with the lack of parking. I don't know if every abutter felt that way, but that was the general temperature of the room. So we've treated the portion of the building closest to Davis Square, and its direct abutter is I don't want to say it's a 60s to 70s brick apartment building, very traditional in nature. And that was sort of our treatment, at least as our first pass here on that portion of the building. And then we have this very distinct break separating the right-hand side, where we have our residential entry, our exit, as well as our garage entry. We're treating the more traditional side with masonry, double hung rather, divided light windows, precast sills and cornice, headers rather, and then additional masonry at the ground level with some decorative banding and soldier courses, a canopy that sort of makes the turn around the corner with potential for signage. And then on this right-hand side, we're obviously treating this differently with a mix of masonry and panel, most likely a cementitious panel. I don't think it would be a hardy. We're looking more towards a sembrate material or something else, but at this stage, that's not finalized. And this aesthetic sort of makes the turn here on the right-hand side of the portion as you're approaching Davis, coming down Highland. The rear of the building, we're abutting not directly in the rear, but on the other side of sort of the warehouse style buildings there. A lot of traditional Somerville triple deckers. So the approach, at least for now, was to treat that backside as a more traditional look with clapboard and panel and recognizable traditional double hung windows. Here's just a sort of bird's eye view here of our common roof deck. We're proposing that the entire roof be a green roof, other than obviously the areas where we have condensers and stairhead houses. The thought is there's an opportunity there to maybe have some sort of building neighborhood garden as well up there. But we may not have the great views of the city, but we think at the 5th floor on the roof there that it's still going to be a very nice amenity for the tenants to go up and enjoy, being that the majority of the building takes up this lot. So we've got the first option that I showed you. Well, we'll go through it real quickly now. So Dan said for now that we're going to kind of just keep one side the same and sort of have a rotating closet on the right here. So the left-hand portion in all of these schemes is the same. So our first option here, we're doing a mix of masonry and panel. The windows are treated slightly different, while at the same sill and head heights. We've removed some of the muntins and sort of created some recessed bays by changing the material while still framing our entranceways and sort of having a continuity on this side of the building while still being completely different from the left-hand side. And we've got a perspective and elevation here of that. The second version, which is the one that I showed earlier, is similar in that we've completely changed our window language on the right. These are all more casement, more contemporary in nature. And we've got this very strong horizontal banding with this panel, and then inset with these verticals that sort of jump from floor to floor. But we're still maintaining this masonry element that carries across the ground floor and ties the building somewhat together while still reading as two very distinct and separate buildings. The cornice treatment, we have a very traditional cornice on the left-hand side, while the right is a much more simplified, more contemporary profile. And then we've obviously done a third option here, which is sort of a mix of the two, in that we've got more masonry on this right-hand side, but we've changed the window language to be more of a contemporary aesthetic with sort of pocket Juliet balconies within these bays that we're sort of framing with trim eyebrows. And again, this is a little more contemporary as well, with some of these sort of exaggerated cornices and picture framing that we're doing. And then treating the ground level entirely different with cast stone as opposed to the brick on the left-hand side. All of these, of course, meet the requirements of the UDC when it comes to using materials at grade that can be, hardy and deal with the winter. But we are treating the two sides of this building obviously significantly different. So I know we have a big agenda, and I'm sure there's a lot of comments, so maybe we can go to that and then leave it up to the board, if that works.
Does the commission have any questions for the applicant?
Actually, for the third option, is that are two different, are they both sides of the building brick?
this last version, yes, we're showing, yes, we're showing, can you see that? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Yep, I can.
Yeah, we're both are brick, obviously different colors, and then we have a completely different treatment at the top. It's a little all over the place, I'm not gonna lie to you. I mean, there's a lot going on here. But this was sort of,
I was gonna say that, I know that it is written in the zoning about, this making the two buildings look different.
Yeah.
But I would say that in this case, and Will, this is nothing to you, but it just seems to me that, what somebody said to me once, and it's like, what's a camel? And a camel is a horse designed by committee. And it seems like there's so many things here that it doesn't look like two distinct separate buildings. To me, at least to me, it looks like it's a lot of different buildings, like your first option, option one, to me reads like, like 3 buildings, in itself, and the idea that the material kind of like brings it together to make it 2, but they all seem to be reading like a multitude of buildings, and I'm having an issue with that. And I know that the zoning clearly says that, but I think that the design of the facade has taken it a little bit too literal to make it so distinct. And then when you look at the back, it's another building in the back. So,
yeah.
And the idea of you're providing a very traditional, corner of a building with brick and the copper, and then you're providing a very modern building. And it's one building with 2 different styles. And I think that that's where I'm beginning to have the conflict with. And if I were to say anything that is moving potentially in the right direction, would be probably option 3, which begins to play with the idea of showing 2 different buildings, but still I think stylistically or material wise is like, it's really creating just a lot for me. And I just have a hard time seeing how something like this rich in interpretation and treatment would be appealing.
So if I could just speak to that really quick, and I don't mean to take up time. I completely agree with you, Frank. I know the thinking behind the zoning on this is that they don't want these massive buildings to just, these chicken coops along the road. They want it to, have some breaking up of the facade. To me, a building like this should have some unifying language on it, especially at ground level. To me, otherwise it's not successful. However, I was told point. Okay, sorry. I won't. I'm not.
I was going to say at this point, I'm sorry to cut you off. Well, the sort of questioning the, sort of we're not here to rewrite the zoning, unfortunately. Sort of it is what it is. But I mean, as far as Frank, as I was writing notes, I didn't get your comments on option 2, which I think is more successful as being 2 buildings. What was your reaction to that one?
I mean, I think that the big issue that I have is that I think that if you're going to try to make the 2 buildings read like 2 buildings, you have to take it from a massing perspective and from a volumetric perspective. And the building with the copper cornice seems to become a different building when it turns by having the white awnings, which is again another new material that's being introduced. So if I were to count the amount of materials that we have is, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 materials almost, and it looks, to me, it looks way too much. I think it's the closest one, potentially maybe that begins to read as 2 buildings, but I think the continuous articulation is just making it seem, to me, not successful by reading as 2 separate buildings, but it's just reading like, it's just like way, way, way too much. I mean, the changing of the windows, the changing of the materials, it becomes hard. I don't know if anybody else feels this way. That's,
Yeah, so Frank, I feel, I agree with what you're saying. I think this is one of the harder criteria to satisfy in a successful way. I think trying to use the language of two different, sort of different time periods and everything it just feels false to me. And this is a contemporary building. It is a single building. It is, and I appreciate maybe an attempt to give some relief along that length, but to just say this half is one style and this half is another style, to me, there's no integrity to this, to that approach. The windows are completely different. I think ultimately, I think it has to stand together, and there maybe is variety along the sidewalk and some variety above also, so it gets a little bit of verticality maybe. But, and I guess unless the zoning's changed, this does have to comply in some way it has to comply with that. And I think Assembly Square, some of the later projects, I think, were a little more successful in breaking down facades. But I think, I guess the reason I asked the question about the last one is I felt that was the calmest one. But I just don't think I really have a problem with the cornice being completely different. And, it just feels false because it will never look like, it'll never look like two buildings. It looks like pastiche, treatment of the facade in my mind. There's no sort of integrity. I think the alternative that gets the closest was the third one, but I think maybe it's just because it's quieter and there are just maybe subtle differences in the brick, but consistent. The windows being completely different. I feel like they could be different, but related in some way so that it holds together as it does both things. It breaks up along the facade so the way we experience it is not monotonous. It's a little more scaled and a little more vertical, like, our neighborhoods are with triple deckers and stuff like that. But I think it needs more work. And I appreciate the challenge that it is.
yeah. I think that somehow trying to take the interpretation of what the code says and be not so literal, but be more contemporary, subtle in the idea of creating two different buildings that begin to play off of each other, that they look slightly different and break up the facade, versus having, kind of like the Disneyland kind of effect, that it's just way too much. And in the end, it would give a more successful building. And again, I agree with the challenges of this. It's a tough one. It's a really tough one. But I think that taking it not so literal and even two different types of like styles, like this is a little bit more contemporary and this is a little bit more traditional, I think it's.
Well, not to get in the weeds on this, but I did, I had a version previously because I had some back and forth with Dan about this. And I had some vertical elements that sort of tied the project together, but split the two. And I was encouraged not to do it that way because of this literal interpretation. So I'm in agreement with everything everyone's saying. This is a tough one. I'm really trying to work with it. I guess just so I have a little bit direction, do you think, what are your thoughts on how that ground level should be? Because to me, there should be some sort of continuity, whether it's a sign band or something. Do you agree or disagree and just say, give it another crack or?
Well, I would say one thing is it's functionally different. If I'm remembering the plan, the left side is commercial, right? It maybe can be legible as commercial, and then the other is residential, and maybe it can be legible that way.
Yeah, no, that's a good approach. trying to juggle all the things of the facade requirements with the glazing and all these excellent things, but it kind of you get lost in it,
It does. It's very easy to get lost. And I think also really trying to minimize the amount of materials
Yeah.
that you use. I think that could also play into the success of that. And I don't think that there would be anything wrong if there are elements that exist and unite the whole thing. They don't necessarily need to, be a continuous, but it could be a balcony that repeats itself and appears, it kind of connects the whole thing, right? Or something else that begins to, oh, okay, I see it. You kind of like put it together, something like that.
Yeah, or it could have a limited palette of materials. Let's say 2 primary materials, and it's so it's red and gray, and one part of that is more gray with a little bit of red, and the other is more of the red. It flips, so that it again, it holds together, but it's there's something that it's unified in materiality.
No, I think what I kind of set myself up to fail here in the sense that the left side is very true. I have 2 very different styles. I think if maybe they were too traditional but different, or too contemporary but different, it would read better. This was more, honestly, this is like a conversation starter. That's how I looked at this presentation, because that's kind of how I took it, because this got caught in the middle of the zoning change, and so kind of learning on it.
Will, in your defense, it's the first time that we're actually reviewing one of these projects that has to comply with that. So it's basically you're the guinea pig for that, which is helping us as well. So, all of the other projects, all of the other ones have been less than 100 feet, so it's a challenge, but I think it's an interesting challenge. But that's it.
Okay, yeah, I mean, and I know that you got your purview is somewhat relegated to the front facade, but I tend to agree that whatever happens on the front needs to carry around to the back, or else it kind of feels like a set piece to me, where it's, a background of one and then it's completely different in the back, like a McMansion with the vinyl siding on the side and the stone on the front. So if you agree with that, it kind of helps.
You will see this you will see the front and the side together, though, won't you?
You will see the front and the side, absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so the corner, like this view that we're seeing that's partial, you see a corner and you can see it returning. Yeah.
Okay.
It needs to be all considered. I would think that's all part of public realm. I think it's the way you experience these things. We don't experience these things as facades. We're walking along the street, right? Or driving along the street. And yeah, primarily, yeah.
Okay, so at this point, I think what I'm hearing is that you would like a redesign and then for Will to come back.
Chairperson Lewis, if I could also add that this project is definitely in need of a landscape plan. As far as I can tell, I believe West Street is a public right-of-way. So I think that there really needs to be attention paid to the streetscape on West and Highland, as well as the project ensuring that the green score is captured within their private property limits and not counting public amenities towards their score.
So just for the record, we have full landscape plans, but I wasn't told to include that in this presentation. So I'm happy to do so at the next one. But I thought, well, correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't realize it was under the board's purview to review the landscape as well. But if it is, that's great. I'll include it next time.
As far as to review the public realm, yes,
Okay.
it is within the board's purview. So the streetscape is definitely
Sure.
a big concern.
Also, Sarah, it's Louisa here. Just, and again, I apologize because I can't see, but we were sent these plans earlier. Just in making sure about the street trees that the sidewalk is sufficiently wide enough to maintain ADA compliance.
You've addressed.
So I have a question.
Can I ask a question too? Just because I know Sarah held us to this on Assembly, does the garage have to be on Highland Avenue? Or is there any ability to locate it, the garage entry on West Street? And in all of your renderings, it looks like it's wide open. Is that actually the case?
So first, West Street, I believe, is a private way. I'm not positive, but I believe it is, accessing that apartment building next door. So that drove that.
Can we find out for sure? Because getting that off of Highland Ave would be lovely.
Well, Anne, I believe, Anne, you're on the call. Can you,
I'm on, yeah. Okay, I'm
can
sorry.
you verify that that is in fact a private way, West Street?
I believe it is. I mean, I don't know otherwise. I believe it is private way.
But we can get you that documentation.
There's like a pilaster on the Google Earth, and there's some existing street trees. There's some existing trees that are there too, and it would just be good to understand if those are staying. What is the actual, what's happening on that facade as well?
Yeah, I apologize for not including the landscape plan. We are intending to maintain all of the trees along West Street. We don't want to remove any of them because there are actually some very nice growth trees there, and only adding plantings along the ground level adjacent to the commercials. But I'll have that next time with us so you guys can review it.
I have a question for the planning group about the parking. So the parking is not required, right? Because they're within the TOD zone. Yeah, I mean, I actually think, and I don't know if this is our jurisdiction, I suspect not. But these curb cuts to provide underground parking are sort of nasty for the sidewalk. Sort of in thinking of the public realm, they are, they're negative. I think they're negative interventions on the street. And especially in a zone where you don't need to have parking, but I suspect parking is not restricted. It's just you don't have to, provide it. But I guess, so this was the developer's choice to build parking here?
Yeah, we did look at both, and to the planning department's credit, they would prefer not to see parking here.
Yeah, I would too.
But at the end of the day, the developer wants, they feel that it's it's worthwhile to do it. That may change if depending on construction costs go here, that may just not be worth it. But it's only 13 spaces, so it's not a tremendous amount. But I understand what you're saying. But I think I didn't mean to gloss over the previous question. It is open. We are showing it as open. We could put a door on there if that would help sort of minimize the aesthetic of walking by a large opening. I'm not opposed to doing that at all. We can look at treating that somehow differently.
That would be helpful.
Okay.
Those 13 spaces are going to end up costing about 1.2 million. Yeah.
I've actually used that exact number when speaking with the summits.
So
I hear you.
Power to him if he wants to pay that. So
maybe it'll become like Boston, where you can sell those spaces for $500,000 a piece down the road. Who knows?
Okay.
Okay. Are there any other questions, comments?
No.
I think at this point, probably the motion we need to make is that this project be continued to the next meeting with, I'm going to call it a comma version, but still maintaining the two separate buildings as required by the ordinance. So.
A comma overhaul. Is that what?
All right, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Third.
I still have to do the roll call vote for the record. Sorry, nice try, Andrew. Deborah,
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
Frank.
Yes.
All right, thank you all, and thank you, Will. Or wait, are you still sitting there for the next one?
I don't know, you tell me, what's the next project on the list? I don't think-
494 Medford Street.
I'm out of here. Nope, that's not me. Thank you all. Have an excellent night.
When will the next UDC meeting be? Sarah,
Oh,
do you know when
yes.
the next, when is the next UDC meeting?
I believe it's 2 weeks. I think November 10th, but I'm guessing. I'll have to check. Do one of our commissioners know that off the top of their heads?
Looking it up.
It's definitely not next week, right? Because it's voting.
No.
Okay, election.
No.
Yeah, it's the 10th. I have it on my.
So when we'll have to get you the plans by the Friday before
Yes.
or the 6th?
Yeah, and then the one after that is the 24th.
Happy Thanksgiving after that.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all.
Good night.
Good night. All right, so our next, how are we all doing? Keep going. Our next agenda item is 494 Medford Street. So Sarah, can you make sure we have the applicant as a presenter?
I am doing that right now, in fact.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
I've got two screens here. I'm going to try to get you on the right one.
Can we get a
And
video?
can you introduce yourself when we start presenting, please?
Yes. I'm not sure what you're seeing of mine.
We're seeing Troll Street and a yellow site plan.
Okay, fantastic. Good evening. My name is Jim Rissling of LR Designs Incorporated, 64 Olson Street, Cambridge, Massachusetts. The project is a mixed-use building in the MR4 district, at the corner of Medford and Troll Street. This is a footprint of the existing house that is there. It's a two-family structure, sort of a cape structure. Let me zoom up here. So this, I'm sure you're familiar with this house, but this is what's there currently at the corner of Troll and Medford. So it's a fairly small lot, approximately 2,571 square feet. And we are proposing a mixed-use building which contains a shop on the first floor, two parking spaces at the rear, and two dwelling units above. And let's see. So this is our first floor plate. Parking would come off the existing curb cut that the house already uses. There are two curb cuts existing. We would be closing that down to a single curb cut. The storefront would be on Medford Street with some secondary access onto Troll. And then the two units would be accessed off Troll Street. These are the unit layouts. They are basically side by side, so duplex units. The The unit, I guess the left-hand unit on Troll Street is 2 stories, and the unit that's at the corner of Troll and Medford is 3 stories. So it occupies a bit of the 4th floor. The structure includes bays, storefront, and some balconies as well that are accessed from the dwelling units. And let's see here. We this was our initial rendition of the building, which included a brick base, a belt band molding here, the bay windows, and then the upper floors in different sized siding. And this is that same basic rendition, but with the materials changing to a sort of cast stone or masonry at the base and brick for 2 stories, and then again a siding material on the 4th. Our second option, stylistically different, but a little more, maybe a little more Victorian in flavor. The brick base, the strong belt band, the bays now continue the 2 stories of the dwelling units. And the 4th floor, it would be clad in a different material, something like an aluminum shingle. And then our final scheme is something a little more contemporary. Again, we have brick piers at the base, stained wood screening the parking enclosure, and then different panels and siding at the 2nd and 3rd floor, and then more of a stained wood screen at the upper floor. I guess I maybe I'm not sure what else I'd like to present. Maybe open it up for questions and we can learn more about the building that way.
Thank you. I appreciate that you've brought us really 4 very different schemes, which is really interesting to see, and that they all look fairly well along in terms of the resolution. I guess one question I have is the 2 streets we're looking at, Troll and Medford. I would think of Medford as being the primary street. I was wondering if there's any facades for the Medford side.
In sort of the I guess I'll call it the Genesis set here. I do have, this is the Medford Street facade for the option 1, basically, which has the 2 renditions in with siding and masonry and brick. So this is that. It's a fairly small elevation.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to see that elevation develop in the same context as the other as well.
Okay. Well, the suggestion was that the material would continue, but I appreciate what you're saying.
Can you show pictures of the context again?
Sure.
Now that we see the options, it'd be, yeah, great to see how we experience.
Right. So what I really felt we wanted to do is sort of take our cues from this structure here across the street, which is number was it 495 Medford Street. It has a base which is painted. I don't know if I have a tighter view of that building. This was set up for the neighborhood meeting. But it is a brick base. It's painted differently for each tenant in the base, and then it's clad in siding, but I'm sure it have much more articulated upper stories. And then this is immediately adjacent. There's one more structure, gabled structure, and then it begins the commercial row on Medford Street. And here you can see that context a little more fully. And then this is kind of looking at the opposite side of Medford Street, where we start to get to 2- and 3-story buildings.
Would yours be one of the first commercial spaces then, or just on the commercial district?
It would be. It would take this position right here. So it would be matching off with that structure I pointed to, 495 Medford Street.
Yep.
And it would be the first commercial into the commercial district.
Yeah.
At least on this side of the street. It's a little more, it dithers out a little bit on the, I guess it's the north side of the street. But it would be a strong start here.
Yeah, because it's the third option. For some reason that one seemed the one. Yeah, I was just trying to. Well, I like the materials, the material selection of this project, and the sort of the weight of it. With the darkness, feels like a nice introduction to the. I mean, a nice. It feels like it affiliates with the commercial district more than the other ones. The other ones feel like they're more sympathetic to the residential, district. So I mean, this is a threshold situation, I guess. So I'm sort of intrigued by this one here for that reason.
That's a good description. I think I did lean a little bit more towards the residential. Maybe being hypersensitive to the neighbors,
right?
As you go down Troll, at least in terms of materiality of the building.
Yeah, but the wood gives it a residential quality too. It's not a robust commercial building. It feels like it bridges with the materials.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because this is not downtown yet, so it seemed like some of that materiality needed to be really thought out.
I can say generally speaking, I probably don't love the second one, but I'm very open to the other three. I think that's what's sort of the one before this, the one with the cast stone on the ground is kind of the one that I'm kind of least excited about. Yeah, this one.
This one. Yeah.
But I think what's nice is that you've presented 3 very different options, and I think honestly, like I can defer to Frank or Deborah and be really talked into any of those 3 pretty easily.
I would start by saying that probably scheme 2 is my least favorite in the presentation. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Now. And I like what Deborah was saying about option scheme 3. I do like some of the language and some of the reading. The only one thing that I would say that I have the brick at the bottom. I think at this point it almost seems like it doesn't belong there. It just doesn't connect to anything else, and it just seems not to be part of it. So I think that whether maybe it's either, kind of like the gray material perhaps that comes back, or a different type of material that maybe creates the base. Because then what I like about scheme 1 is the clarity of the base with the building sitting on top of it. You know, there was something, the one with the cast stone at the bottom.
Yes.
You seem to have two scheme ones, right? So
That's, yeah, which one
Yeah,
is,
just, right.
there's something elegant about having the reading of a base that would have some type of a cast stone, not CMU, anything like that. And then you have the upper story sitting on top of it. It is, you know, simple and elegant. But again, I think that, you know, 1 and 3 are kind of like, you know, different in what they're presenting, and they're successful in, each of them are successful in their own ways. What's your feeling about this one, Deborah?
Well, I agree with you. I think the first one and the third one are the strongest ones. I'm sort of intrigued by the third one. Yeah, but
I think I definitely would. I think I would definitely be lenient towards the third one. I think that if the brick had a little bit more of a reasoning behind it, or some other treatment that embraced the base differently,
Yeah.
it just seems very paper application in that area. And then the one question that I would have is on the reading of the windows in the bay. It seems very glassy, very open, with the mullions being very, very thin, almost like, you know, part of the storefront. In the end, would that be the case, that they would be that open and that wide, and it would be just 3 windows molded together? Or I always hate seeing an elevation being presented with a lot of glass, and then in the end you get the reality of it, and it's 3 windows, and you get, you know, material coming in between them, and then you lose the reading of it. So
Right.
I like the reading of the opening. I would hate to see material that start coming in between it.
Yeah, that was the objective, was to have it read with the storefront. I think we'd have to have maybe some operable panels within these lower areas, or maybe a push out just for that residences. But that was the goal, was to have it be as thin as possible. You know, and be speaking to the storefront at the base of the building.
I think, so Frank, I completely agree with you about the brick not being, there's not enough of it. It reappears, I guess, on the Medford Street side. But I feel like maybe the commercial space, I don't know whether the intent is to have it accessed from Trull or from Medford. But, maybe there's a brick base that holds this together a bit and biases one or the other. If the entry's, on Medford, maybe that there's a brick base on Trull or vice versa. Something that, has the brick holding the facade, the base of the building together, and giving a little more clarity to, the commercial space. Where do you enter the commercial space? I know I see there are 2 doors. Yeah, so anyway.
Yeah, the intent is it would be on Medford Street. Would be that, because that's the address, and it just seemed like it's a continuation. I mean, it's this little door shown here right now, but that would be the primary entrance to the retail. And also because I'm contending with a sloping site as we go down Troll.
Yep.
But I like what you're suggesting with the base, because I did start to incorporate something like that here to break down this mass, or this height of this wall, and also contain some of the intentional planting, the dedicated planting area. And so maybe that would be a great way of dealing with the slope here. And rather than having this planting just sort of bleed out into the sidewalk, it could be contained.
I like that raised bed too. I'm not seeing, so I guess one thing would just be to make sure that we actually have the space to accomplish that.
Yeah, it is very minimal, I have to admit. We're pushing up against the you know, the 2-foot setback. So we might have to really look at that and, you know,
Yeah.
whether,
Generally speaking, just sort of understanding what that little green hatch area is and what can actually be grown or accomplished in that 2 feet. Because I think the shrubs, the way you have them illustrated, looks really nice, but I just want to make sure that we have the space to accomplish what we're saying that we're doing.
right. And that's why I thought that the raised bed was a way to accomplish that. And then we would rely on you know, locations for street trees on Triple Street.
And question, James, on the Medford Street side, is there a door associated with that entry into the unit? Or does this need to just be, there is a door?
Yes, there is a unit door. Okay, I'm in the wrong. So that, right here. So this is the door. It'd be flanked by the masonry piers. And that allows the second means of egress from the front unit. And then there's a shared entrance on the shared entrance for the 2 units here. And then the second means of egress for the rear unit is into the yard.
Right. I think from my perspective, I think I definitely would like to see a little bit more development of the third scheme as we're suggesting. And I really would like to see a similar development from the color perspective material of that front elevation from Medford Street as well. Just because, you know, we get to see a lot of, you know, the Troll Street side and the development, but I would love to see that separate as well, that facade and how it works and how it begins to incorporate. And I mean, if you had the opportunity to show a 3D or a 3-dimensional of it, you know, I think it would be helpful to understand it from a massing perspective, how it sits next to its context, and just so we can see the masses playing and the projections and some of those extrusions of your building.
Okay. Yeah, I felt like this, I mean, maybe you picked up on that, you know, this obtuse angle here. You know, these facades are going to be, I feel like they're going to be read together most of the time. And it's not to argue your point, but it's why I gave the emphasis to the Troll Street elevation, because I felt it presented the full flavor of the expression of the building.
Sure. So maybe if you were to take one of the angles from the existing conditions that you have at the site, in which you're looking at it from the opposite corner, to see then that 3-dimensionally, just to see how it sits, I think it would be helpful to see it. You know, it's still very flat in this case, and I see what you're saying, but I just would like to see that also as well.
Okay, yeah, no, I appreciate, because having this input, then it allows us to put the energy into, I mean, I'm not saying we wouldn't do it, but it allows us to direct the energy into modeling something that is moving in the direction you want to see it, or not want to see it, but you're recommending or think is appropriate.
Yeah, and also, you know, this having also a more contemporary reading, I would stay true to that as well with the balcony interpretations. I know that there are different readings that you had in some of the options, and some of them were a little bit more traditional in some of the schemes. So I would say that, you know, stick with the contemporary component as well, also on the backside of the balcony, so that your intent reads throughout.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I have to admit, looking at this, you know, we didn't commit one way, you know, we have maybe some horizontal cable rail here and then some glass on the upper floor. We didn't yet commit to that. I appreciate that input.
Okay, are there any more questions for the applicant, or it sounds like you do want to see option 3 with a bit more refinement. So what I would like to do is if we can make a motion that option 3 is your preferred schematic, then we can go, the applicant can go forward with that and make those revisions. Do
So moved.
I have a motion?
Yeah, I motion that option 3 is our preferred option with modifications, and we urge the architect to come back and show us some of those modifications.
Second that.
Okay. All right, roll call vote.
Yes.
Andrew,
Yes.
and Frank.
Yes.
All right. Would you like to go through the guidelines this evening or do that at the next meeting?
Next meeting.
Okay. All right. So in that case, thank you very much.
Thank you, James.
We will see you at the next meeting.
Great. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
All right. And last but not least, we have 28 through 44 Broadway.
Sarah, could you let me know who is here? This is Sarah White. I assume Phil Sema and Ben Rogan. Anybody else?
I know Ben is on that project. I don't know who the team is. Can you unmute Ben?
I've unmuted both of them. They're muted on their side.
Oh, hey,
Okay.
good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yes,
Who's going to be presenting for
Good
you?
evening as well. Phil will be presenting.
Okay, Phil, I'm going to make you a presenter right now. Give me a second.
Okay. Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Are you seeing the PDF with 4 points on it, context, facade, and street level?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Philip Sema from Balance Architects. I think everybody has seen this project in some iteration over the years. Now we've kind of updated it to the newest zoning regulations. So we're going to try and touch upon 4 things. We'll give you just a brief introduction of the context. We have 3 design options for the facade. This is a 200-foot long building. So we'll be dealing with that issue that was, coming up before. Then we have some street level design options, specifically where we'd be placing the garage entry. There has been some concern about our proposed location by the neighbors. And then we'll also look at the residential design entry along Broadway. So the building abuts George Street and Mount Vernon, and basically takes up the whole block from Taco Loco to the Bolter Plywood site, very close to 93 over here, but we see this kind of as the gateway to East Somerville. Some aerial shots and street view shots. Right now, all of the buildings on the property are now abandoned. Taco Loco has moved across the street, and Bolter has been gone for a couple of years now. Just showing the general massing on, the context of the assessor's map. Some more aerial views, but I think everyone is familiar with this site. So the property is MR6. There's another abutting MR6 on George Street, and then there's some abutting NR. So that kind of shapes our building in a lot of ways with setbacks in the back. You'll see we kind of step back at certain levels. So we are going for 91 units with ground floor retail, basement parking, and then 5 floors of residential above that retail. Just briefly kind of going through the plans. Again, the basement is all basically parking. With the new zoning, there's much more requirements for long-term bike parking. So we've integrated a lot of that into the garage area and on the ground floor level where the retail would be. And then you see these kind of denser floor plates on the 2nd and 3rd floor. And by the time we get to the 4th, 5th, and 6th, we're really kind of pushing back and stepping back from the zoning regulations, both having step backs on the facades as well as setbacks against the NR area. The building is fairly tall, but with the orientation, it doesn't really shadow the neighborhood. This rear side is south. That's where we put a lot of the common amenities like outdoor roof deck, outdoor green spaces, and then some park planting on the ground floor levels. And these are some of those green spaces that we're talking about. A number of units that go directly out onto that level have private green roof decks, but we also have shared amenity spaces for all residents on this level. Taking a look at the ground floor, we have the ramp coming off George Street. Because the building is 200 feet long, but the site is 225 feet. We've kind of positioned it so it has equal opportunity on each corner to provide some type of outdoor amenity. We're hoping that would be in the form of a cafe with outdoor seating on one side. And that option is kind of available on the other as well. It's the retail space isn't divided right now, but the intent is to provide space for local retail. So this could be kind of set up for 4 tenants or 3 tenants, depending upon kind of what the market demands and what people are looking for. In the back, we kind of have back of house areas in this alley with a vegetative screen. We're working with MDLA for landscape architecture, and I know that we had kind of gone through some earlier changes based on the previous design. Most of these have really been kept in place. There's some planting along the rear, opportunities along the sides, some permeable pavers. We've talked about moving the blue bike station that's down the street to be right in front of the residential entrance, keeping what trees we can, and then providing additional short-term bike racks outside. And just showing some potential areas for permeability with the pavers. So going to get into the facade design. We have 3 options. Our first option we're calling the brownstone massing because we're trying to make it look kind of more like 5 distinct buildings still kind of tied together. But this is the original or our first design option where we kind of have one building typology on the corner, another on this corner. In between, we have something that's similar colors. This is imagined to be a terracotta facade with the wood being a phenolic resin panel, and then the black being an ACM, kind of a Lucabond charcoal color panel. You can see our residential entry here, which we are kind of showcasing differently from the commercial entries as part of the zoning requirement. And to give a better sense, the perspective, this is what you'd be coming from if you're coming basically from the Boston side going into Somerville. Kind of a prominent corner here with plenty of signage and that outdoor seating. That's the residential entry. And this is kind of looking at from the other side. We have each one of these bays pushed back 3 to 4 feet, and you can see this upper level setback or step back on the top floors, and that's where we're seeing some of these kind of private roof areas. This is our second option. This is our preferred option. I think that it kind of is truest to the character of the building design that we had before. We really call it kind of the light dark scheme. So there's clearly one side of the building is this phenolic resin panel with a lighter color for all the fenestration, creating these vertical elements with an extruded aluminum piece that goes around these windows, on both ends of here, and then kind of having that center middle piece feel different in the fenestration as well as that entry. And then here we're looking at, again, a terracotta panel for the facade. And then slightly different feelings for the retail on the ground floor than what you'd see on the left. Here we have some of these kind of lighter masonry columns or pilasters coming all the way down to the ground. Here we have more of kind of like a floating glass facade, or at least a similar color to the mullions to make it feel kind of cohesive and floating. You can kind of get some impressions based on the perspective. So again, this lighter gray material coming down on this side versus this kind of floating band on the opposite side. And then our third design option is a bit of a mishmash of the two, but we're kind of, again, saying one side is more of a similar color composition. So this is, again, terracotta panels on this side. And here we're kind of introducing some ACM banding, making it feel kind of more framed and prominent on the corner and in the middle here. You can see what that looks like in perspective. It's certainly more kind of pronounced, the bump out, especially in the middle. And this is that view from the other side.
Bill, can I ask a
These are the three
clarifying
options.
quickly?
Sure.
So as far as the massing goes, the massings are exactly the same on each, correct? Sort of, it looks like the ins and outs are identical.
Correct.
Okay. So basically we have one massing option and some material differences.
Yeah, so our understanding from the zoning is that for buildings over 6 floors, it would be a requirement of the UDC for us to provide different massing options. But because
Yes.
it's under that, our requirement is to provide different kind of facade and fenestration options.
No, this is a 6 building, isn't it? So that means you do have to do the massing options, I thought.
I think it's for anything above 6 stories. This was what we were kind of clarifying with Rebecca on this.
Okay.
But yeah, if that's a requirement, then we'll certainly go and make sure we offer different massing options.
So is that the case or not? Sarah, is that the case that?
I am checking with the, I'm looking at the ordinance right this moment. I think it is above 6 stories, so I apologize. I thought it was 6 and up.
So these are the 3 design options we have. Where we can either transition to the street level, or I don't know if it makes sense to have comments on the facade now. It's kind of up to you.
So what is the preference of the commission? Would you like to talk about the?
Is the logic consistent with the facade alternatives, or is it completely, do you have 3, or do you have different logics, or a single logic? Maybe you don't have to have alternatives for that. If there, again, in other words, if you have a logic for the light dark, for the brownstone, and for the red corner, then maybe now is the time to explain it.
Yeah, well, I mean,
we also have,
yeah, I think,
This is Ben Rogan speaking now. We also have different options for location of the access to the garage in combination with different potential storefront programs. So we can
Yeah, so-
present that now or later.
Yeah, because that ultimately does affect the facade. So maybe, can I just run through that one as well? And then we can get back on that. So, so the way that we presented this always has been to have the garage entry off of George or Mount Vernon Street, because Broadway is a pedestrian street, and that would be restricted to have the parking entry off Broadway. However, many of the neighbors would much rather prefer that this entry is off of Broadway because they feel that there's additional traffic that would be caused from having it here. And no matter where you put it, whether it's on Mount Vernon or not, you're still having traffic that's going to basically have to circle around the block to get out. So this is what you've seen before. We have not, this is with the garage entry off of Broadway. And what that feels like on the sidewalk. We do have an option that we do believe would work with the zoning regulation, because there is an existing curb cut that's there. So we wouldn't be providing a new curb cut. We don't love it, but we do think that it would make the neighborhood happy. So it's certainly something that we're willing to entertain, and we think it does work. It just is a little bit of a shame to kind of break up some of this prime, opportunity for commercial and retail space. But this is what that could look like if it was coming off of Broadway, just kind of somewhere in the middle of the building, and generally just trying to keep it very discreet in its appearance.
Let me clarify the commission. Just because there's an existing curb cut there, it is a pedestrian street, and the garage entrance, I think, would require, I'm not even sure you can get a variance to have it accessed off of a pedestrian street, whether there's an existing curb cut or not. So please consider that as you're discussing.
I appreciate it.
It would require a variance, you're saying?
I'm not sure what it would require at this point in time, but it is definitely not, vehicular access is prohibited on pedestrian streets.
Okay.
We went over this with Rebecca, and she checked with the town council or legal department or somebody, and she said we would be allowed to have the curb cut off of Broadway, but that it wouldn't be something that the planning would support. That's what we're told.
Okay, because you are reducing the nonconformity.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I
And
can
as
see
Phil said, we don't love it, but there's a couple of the neighbors that they've been making a big stink about entrance off of George Street. So we're just trying to present something for your feedback.
How many apartments are there? How many apartments?
There's 91 units, and I think there's 22 parking spots.
Oh, only 22 parking spots.
26.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, maybe that was with the compact spots, but in this neighborhood under the zoning, no parking spots would be required because it's within that, quarter-mile distance to public transit.
Until recently, I was a neighbor in this community, and I would not be excited about having the garage on Broadway at all. There's a ton of foot traffic that goes through that space on its way to Sullivan. It's all sort of, coalescing in this moment, and I would not be excited to see a garage on that facade.
Okay. And finally, we looked at 3 different kind of schemes for a residential entry. One that's less pronounced and kind of blends more so, I guess, with the signage that you'd see along Broadway. Something a little bit larger, darker, higher fenestration, and then this last design option relates to that kind of light dark theme, and tying into that light building top. So, and that is the end of our presentation. So, however, we can open it up for comments and questions.
Can you stay on the 3? Yeah, can you stay on that one?
Yes.
It is definitely a more successful breakup of facades than we saw in the previous project, I'll say that. Why did you decide to break it up into 4 and 2? Where did the 4 number come from? Because either the zoning says 2 or more, right? So how did you come up with breaking it up into 4?
So I think for us, like the logic has always been about like the scale of what these bays feel like, and that, you know, although this is like a boulevard that will be changing, that will be having larger buildings, we still think this kind of like 30-foot bay feels really nice on a human scale. Makes it feel smaller, makes it feel not like Assembly Row, but like more like a kind of neighborhood that you'd see in, I don't know, the South End or, you know, Brooklyn. And so that's really kind of the sizing of these distinct bays, is to make it feel not as big as it really is. And I think the setback is really successful on the top floors to give that feeling. So that's where that came from.
And is the red brick or terracotta?
Terracotta.
Terracotta.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I mean, I would say one thing, there's something that I like about the elegance and the simplicity of the light dark scheme. You know, it's just, you know, it breaks it up enough and articulates it and still keeps it in a very consistent language that I'm really drawn to it more. Not saying that the other schemes have not been broken up well. You know, they tend to work, but because of the mass of the building, I think that breaking it in the 2 pieces, then having some of the setbacks is really what is apropos with that scale of a building versus chopping it up more. And to me, it reads well and it blends in well. And I like the subtlety of the materials. What are the materials again in the light dark?
So that's a phenolic resin panel for the wood side with like light colored, you know, aluminum extrusions. And then the right side, we'd also have it be a terracotta panel, just a dark terracotta.
Right.
Would you like us to pull up the rendering of the light dark scheme so we could look at it in more detail?
Could you please?
Yeah, actually, so Frank, I agree with you. That's the one I was drawn to. And but with the caveat that I feel like maybe the dark, that maybe this the massing. I know you're not going to want to hear this, but you know, because you've probably been advancing the massing. But I feel like the massing could change in the dark, on the dark side, and it becomes, you know, sort of anchors the building rather than, you know, so that it maybe doesn't. Maybe it's just all the recessed, or there's something about them. Maybe it's more frequent that it goes in and out, but that that the logic for the massing changes at that end, and it becomes, more like a single thing with some articulation that gives it verticality, or it anchors that side of it. But Frank, I was also struck by this one. It's light enough that you're going to really get shadow from the recesses are significant enough that it does feel like it's going to have that visual relief and the scale and create a scale that makes sense. So I think it's pretty successful.
Is there,
I would manipulate the massing of the dark side.
is there some type of on the light side, is there some type of a frame around the windows that stops the material?
Yeah.
What is it? Is it an aluminum frame?
Yeah, an aluminum extrusion.
An aluminum extrusion.
Yeah. And it just feels really nice to like tie that together, that verticality right there.
It does. I like it a lot. I think the rendering's not doing justice because it begins to blend in too much to the material. And I think it needs to be more in the genre of the window mullion, right? If I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that to have that a little bit more standard, I think it would help also on the facade, just because it's right now, I wasn't sure whether that was just the inside of the window or not, but it's an elegant feature that I like as well. And maybe that doesn't happen on the darker side, as Deborah's saying, it's a distinctive element that appears in this building. And maybe the windows exist on the darker side, but not the same detailing of this connection of the frame, but a different articulation of the massing.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what we've done kind of on these 3 lower levels. That's where you have it. We lose it on the top to make the top feel just a little bit different, but yeah, it's certainly something we like, and we'll definitely kind of maybe expand it or embrace it more.
And as for the location of the entrance to the parking garage, it's really interesting. I think if you would have said to me that it was 90 cars parking there and entering and exiting, it would have been a different thing to see all those cars having to circulate around the neighborhood to get out. But 26 cars, coming in off of the Broadway, I don't see that as a problem. But again, I mean, you're saying that the neighborhood has a huge issue. I would not want to see the entrance off of Broadway. It's just disruptive to the pedestrian experience. And you can only make a right coming out of it, right? So coming out, you can only go right. So you'd be heading into traffic, and I see people just like making an illegal U-turn all the time to try to get out of that. And it's just, it breaks up too many things, and it's just not successful. So I would say 26 units off of St. George or whatever that is, 26 cars, doesn't seem to be that powerful. My preference would be to keep it on the side.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
But overall, well, I think that this is we've been seeing this in a lot of reiterations, right? We've been seeing it also through a lot of different firms that you've been at.
It's been changing this building.
It's a very it's successful. I think it's very elegant. I like the articulation. I like the treatment of the base. I like the elegance of the materials. I think it's a very delicate approach.
Thank you.
We go to the landscape plan.
Yeah, definitely.
I think I agree with all of the architectural comments that have been made thus far. I will say that I do wish that the landscape spaces in the public realm, they feel a little bit just sort of like leftover slivers of the building, and I wish that they had some of that same weight and they had some of that same impact because it is a big major building, especially leading to East Somerville, and it really feels like those landscape spaces. I think Mike has done what he can with them, but they just feel like leftover space to me.
Yeah.
If I choose between getting the blue bikes out of Mount Vernon and getting another tree on that street, I would probably take a tree. Just it's again sort of a big facade, and to only have the 4 trees right there, I think it could hold another one.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
the light material too, is a great backdrop for landscape. So, I agree. I wish there could be more density with the landscape at grade, especially.
Yeah, we can certainly talk with Mike about that. And I don't know if there is any ability for landscape too, like in the public realm, like between these trees, just because we are a little limited.
I guess what I'm looking for is can some of that massing of the building itself provide a little bit more space for the landscape areas that are there, or somehow correspond so that it feels intentional, so that the massing is creating something that relates to what's going on, because it sort of feels like it really feels like we just sort of did an offset off the curb, and what was left got pavers. And I think the building needs to provide the ability for the landscape to have a little bit more space, or something a little more intentional.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, so does anyone else have the impulse that I do to modify the massing a bit on the dark side? Or are you not bothered by the sort of the homogeneous massing and then 2 different materials? And maybe it just happens at the penthouse level too, but that you break that it becomes flat at the dark building or something.
I feel like I'm like a broken record on like Calm It Down, and this is very calm to me. So I could see it. I could see it doing a little bit more. I could see it going to too calm, but I think having sort of seen some of the other ones, like to have a calm one feels a little bit like a relief.
Yeah.
All right, so are we good? It sounds like we have a preferred design option. So can I get a motion for the preferred design option? I believe is the light dark scheme.
So moved. Light dark preferred.
Second.
Second. Third.
Roll call vote. Deborah.
Yes.
Frank.
Yes.
Andrew.
Yes.
All right. How would you like to proceed? Shall we go through the design guidelines?
Yes.
Can we maybe read them and say if we have any exceptions to any of them, as opposed to going through everyone, having you read everyone? Because I think they were a part of one of these presentations in the Dropbox.
Yes.
That work?
That works for me.
The thing that I will note is each one does have to be addressed in some way unless it is absolutely clearly not applicable. So we can't just dismiss it if we don't, sort of we don't like it or we don't think we want to apply it to this building.
Okay. Okay.
So Deborah, how do you want to?
Actually, could we really quickly look at the, your ground floor again, now that we have, a, direction with the alternative and talk about it in relationship to them? The facade, I mean, the development of the retail level expression.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
So like these shots?
Yeah, yep, thank you. So what is the strategy? So this is not light dark. So would the strategy be, or is this is the strategy that you would apply with the light dark?
Yeah, I mean, for when we were looking at these, it was really looking at putting the garage on one street versus the other. But the light dark strategy is that when you're on this light side, you have kind of light dark, but you have these dark pilasters or kind of grayish pilasters coming down from this upper level here. And then we're trying to introduce at least some type of like 2-foot masonry band to kind of raise that storefront off of the sidewalk. So I don't know if this shows it any better, but this is not the light dark scheme per se, but that same language is happening on, throughout this light side. Does that make sense?
So they would be brick, but a light brick and a dark brick? Is that the idea?
Yeah. So on this side, it's all a kind of light gray brick that comes down, and on this side, we have it as like a much darker like ACM panel, so that there's kind of this contrast between the two on the ground level. I'll try and zoom in.
Bill, what sort of panel did you say? Side?
We're showing this as an ACM panel,
Okay.
which is an aluminum composite material.
Yep. Okay. We do need to, so the things that were presented, we do need to vote on the garage access point as well, because that we were shown options on, and then to, however we want to go through the guidelines for the architectural guidelines on facade guideline. So, and it sounds like from the discussion that we need a motion for the vehicular access to the parking garage should be off George Street.
I motion that the vehicular parking garage entry should be off of George Street.
Second.
Somebody else gets it.
Roll call vote. Roll call.
Oh.
Frank?
Deborah. Oh.
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
Andrew?
Yes.
All right, all in favor, thank you. I'm sorry to sort of backtrack a little bit. Were there modifications that you wanted to see? Do we want to, or just go through the guideline pieces?
I would love to see some landscape, sort of further development, but not enough to hold the process up.
Okay. So we have a motion for a submittal of a landscape plan to be submitted to the commission for review by email.
That sounds good.
Can I make a question or just a clarification for Phil in regards to the guidelines?
Can I get a second real quick on the landscape plan?
Yes, I second.
All right, roll call vote. Frank,
Yes.
Deborah,
Yes.
Andrew.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Frank, go ahead.
Phil, one of the questions that needs to be approved as part of the guidelines is item 12D, which is mechanical louvers necessary for venting purposes are not permitted in the required frame, but may be incorporated into any storefront, lobby addresses, blah, blah, blah. From your elevations, we really don't see the idea of any venting happening on the elevations. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yes, so on the facades, so all along George and Broadway, Mount Vernon, for all the residential venting, we'd have that be either on the rear or on the roof. And then for the ground floor retail, we have incorporated louvers in case this becomes like a restaurant or something.
Okay.
So that was our approach with that.
Okay, so I let that be known, Sarah, that, no venting for the residential pieces would be located in the facades, but the rear
Right,
and up.
okay.
But would be allowed out the rear facade, not the front facade.
Yes, it would be allowed at the rear and up.
Correct. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ben, was that you?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Any other comments on the design guidelines?
I have one question, actually.
Okay.
Item 12F. It says buildings of 5 or more stories should include at least the entire height of the first 2 stories in the required base. The design of the base may not shift up or down. Is that saying that in a building like this, which is 5 stories or more, the base has to read on the 2 stories?
Let me find the exact wording, but the way you read it, it sounds yes.
And this was something that we did look at and thought that it conflicted with other parts of the zoning code, which called for a distinct base, middle, and top, and that there's like a tripartite system that the zoning code is asking for, and that if we do this, that there's really no distinction because you have 2 stories on the top, 2 stories in the middle, and 2 stories on the bottom.
I agree. I'm reading what it says, right? So I just want to confirm, that I totally agree with you. I think that because of the scale of this building, a 2-story base would just look stupid.
Yeah. So if we're all in agreement on that, can we say that we agree with the design that's presented here, despite the fact that it doesn't have a 2-story reading for the base?
I believe it can be acknowledged in the report, but it obviously does not meet that guideline, so
Yeah.
we have to
But
note that.
But we feel that the design is presented, meets the
Is it-
spirit.
Yeah, well, let me ask the question, is it worth, even if it's not a full 2 stories, if one of the buildings, because I'm going to refer to it as 2 buildings, where you talked about changing the massing, that was the question about whether you wanted to make the modification, to see a modification or not. And should perhaps one of the storefronts come up to the sill of the 2nd floor rather than being an entirely 2-story base?
No, I don't think so.
I'm sort of reading that there's a different, maybe I'm wrong, but there's a different depth between the light building and the windows and what do you call it? There's more mass, there's more surface on the light building than on the dark building below that, the 2nd floor window. Is that correct? I mean, I'm feeling like there's a distinction in it that supports the scale of the.
Yeah. And we did introduce another material that bands across to make that distinction between the materials. So you have this kind of black band there. So it makes it feel, and it is like an inch or 2 shorter as well. So
Yeah. So I feel like it gives them different scales, but which I
think it's successful as it is. And I
Yeah.
think that trying to push the floors to read, I think it would look odd at this scale. That typically works when you have an 8-story, a 10-story building. It works really well to do that, but at this scale, I don't think it works.
Andrew, are you comfortable with that? In agreement with that?
Yeah, I don't want a 2-story. I think that would be weird.
Yeah, so we're so that's unanimous. We support.
Okay, so guideline, you said it's 12F, sorry, I'm flipping screens.
12F, yeah, 12F.
Okay, all right, so. But the commission believes there's enough articulation between the 2 and reads well in proportions.
Yes.
Second. Yeah.
And after reading all of these, I would say that 12 facade design from A to I, it does comply with all of them. So as well as in 13. So
All right, so let's have a motion that the design guidelines have been met with the exception of 12F, and the commission believes the proportions of the building still read well without a 2-story base.
I motion.
I second.
All right, roll call vote. Frank?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
Andrew?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and there were no design modifications requested. All right. Then I think we are complete.
okay. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciated all the comments and thought about this building. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. 5th time is a charm.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks, Deborah. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Thanks all. Have a good night.
Bye.
Yeah, have a great night. Thanks for staying up with us. Appreciate it.
A lot of growling stomachs here.
All right, so at that point, that is the end of our agenda. So the next motion is to adjourn.
I
I
make a
motion to adjourn.
All right, second.
that too.
All right, roll call vote. Darn it. Frank,
Yes, adjourn.
Deborah,
Yes.
Andrew.
Oh, yes.
All right, so 8:29 p.m. it is called. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Good night, guys.
We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.